So some more interesting information here. As we predicted, 5, 6, 4, 3, 2, 1 years ago, every day we've been speaking about how they're going to be implementing this over the last half decade at least, and nobody believes it, of course, until it actually happens, just like COVID, which was a total scam. So Germany, Italy, France and Spain are implementing biometric checks on the border now, i.e. fingerprints and iris scans, which is very interesting because the premise for this, which is comical, is for security reasons, right? Yet mass immigration has been adopted as a policy by the European Union, which completely bypasses any form of autonomy for national citizens to implement on their own government, because a government, of course, is a derivative of high-end monopolized banking systems that control the entire world, and they frankly don't care about what you, as a national citizen, care to state with respect to your own country. So the premise is that it will help with security. And this extends in Spain as the most extreme example to the fact that they want to check your bank statements now, and they require you to have at least 100 euros a day in your bank when visiting Spain, which is ridiculous, of course, because that's not how much it costs to live in Spain at all. I don't even think Spain's own citizens have that amount of money in their bank accounts. So the whole idea of this is completely ludicrous. But what's even scarier and stranger is that take a standardized policy of the European Union, which is freedom of movement, which again is to undermine the existing population. Now that is a policy that has to be adopted by every member state. Yet this new security protocol hasn't been adopted by every member state. Funny that, isn't it? How security is supposedly the prime incentive for shared political kind of policies and legislation, i.e. that's what the European Union is supposedly about. Of course, for us that understand it, is simply a mechanism for lobbyists to centralise their power into Strasbourg and Brussels without having to individually go to each country and manipulate each said government. That's the origin of the EU. So we only have 4 countries doing it. And I'll tell you frankly why they're doing this. They're staggering it because there's still a lot of countries within the European Union that adhere to traditional principles, and those are being attacked left, right and centre. Prime example being Poland, which is a very Catholic country. People have a lot of religiosity there, and these are the sorts of countries that are still largely opposed to the authoritarian, totalitarian mechanisms being supplanted by the European Union, which is no different from the Soviet Union and any other totalitarian state. So they can't bring that into effect at 100%, let's say. They're staggering it with a 5-10% threshold at the moment. So they've taken the big players. Italy, Spain, France and Germany are of course the biggest, most important countries within the European Union, and they're being hit with this system first, and from there on they'll extend it to all the other countries who won't stand a chance when opposing all of these big players. If you want to look at it economically, which I don't think it is an economic argument. I think nothing is really economic in the grand scheme of things. It all boils down to very small networks of individual people who have infinite amounts of funds, and the very fact that nearly every country in the world is in debt by trillions of dollars shows that there is really no such thing as standardized economics as taught in school, both primary and tertiary. The entire thing is literally made up to the point where you can implant another 5 decimal places on a bank statement for, let's say, the German Treasury or the United States, and no one's going to notice, which is of course what we've seen from 2008, 2011 and 2020 with $20-30 trillion worth of bailout funds, an amount of capital that is not even comprehensible for most people. So the entire system of standardized economics is a lie. It's complete bullshit. It's Fugazi. So as we predicted, they're implementing all of these policies and pursuing the Chinese social credit system. And this is for you all to look up. This isn't something that is farcical, though you would have called us conspiracy theorists 10 years ago. This is something that is becoming a universal policy. And it isn't just with respect to Europe. And the scariest thing that I've seen personally, and something that is for now being stalled, is during 2019, this whole COVID scam. I was traveling the entire time. I'm not vaccinated. I hadn't been wearing any masks or anything like that. And in Sweden, Romania and Serbia, 2 of which are European Union countries, and Serbia of course isn't in the European Union, they have been constructing RFID systems publicly, which means that in order to enter certain public spheres, so for example if you want to enter a central plaza in the city of Belgrade, or in Romania the example was Craiova, or Stockholm in Sweden, the idea for the future, and these systems are already built, they're already constructed, is that every time you walk through the RFID scanner, It basically can analyze your data sets and record where you've been, at what time of day, what month, what year, etc. And that information is eternally stored, essentially. So if I want to buy a new shirt or a new pair of jeans in Stockholm or Craiova or Belgrade, some such examples, I have to walk through the RFID system. They track my bank statements, my IDs, because all of these things are going to be aligned to a social credit system as already adopted in China, as it's already been adopted in part by the Italian government, and as the Bank of England have already alluded to, they're going to conform to something not dissimilar with a crypto-backed financial system for the future. And all of these things are intended to remove any form of autonomy and self-regulation from people's lives. People always conform to the preachings that it's more economical and more practical to have a digital system in place. But the reality is, if you have cash and you use cash all the time, the government can't track how you spend your money and how much money you have. And that's why they want to remove physical currency from the equation. And that's something that they've been adopting for many hundreds of years. We started with gold and gold standard paper currency systems, whereby you could trade your US dollars in a bank in the 1960s up until the late 70s under Nixon for physical gold. That was then removed, which meant that paper currency in effect had no value. And now paper currency is being removed, so it's just digital. It's just essentially a digitalized system that can be altered at any given moment. And if the government so choose, they can block your bank account, which is what we've already seen in self-proclaimed liberal countries like Canada, when any form of political opposition enters the scenario, like the trucker revolts, they freeze people's bank accounts. We've seen Ireland. Anyone that's opposed to mass migration in Ireland, i.e. people that are proud of their own country and heritage, are being refused banks and having their banks closed. And for me personally, I've lost so many banks. Revolut, the biggest fintech company in the world now, as of last week, closed my bank account instantaneously without any prior warning, which I'm pretty sure is illegal, but it doesn't matter. They can do what they want. So, we're seeing a universal system of totalitarianism being applied and supplanted in every level of society. And it isn't just with respect to whether you want to disembark from a certain airport in a certain place. It's what your kids are being taught at school. It's the food you're eating. It's every aspect of people's existence is being tailored to a specific political context and narrative. People in the Western world, a very small minority of people like ourselves that understand this, probably less than 15% of people are aware of what's going on. Many of these people will look at other places in the world, Bangladesh as an example, and Bangladesh at the moment, they might look to China, they might look to places that are typically more liberal in South America, Latino cultures, and they may assume that what is taking place in the Western world isn't going to affect those countries. It absolutely is, and I would argue in many places it's even worse, perhaps, because the less education that people have, the less let's say economic privileges, for lack of a better term, the more susceptible people are to being pushed around by governments. And I think what we've seen in 2019 to 2021 with the so-called vaccinations, which are a total scam, of course, it's all a scam, it's all about social control, they were only mainly implanted in highly developed countries. Now, not always highly populated and highly developed countries, but if we look at Africa as a whole, Africa is a continent which commands a vast proportion of the global population. People can be easily exploited, as they're being exploited now with respect to resources, and as they have been in terms of what people deem as colonialism. Yet vaccinations were never supplanted in any of those countries to the degree that they were in, say, Europe, South America, and parts of Asia, and not even all of Asia. And it's not something that's aligned to a specific religiosity or political mindset or racial categorization. It's simply logic. If you want to take control of the world, you take control of the market leader. And the market leader, unfortunately, is still the United States, culturally speaking. People listen to their music, people watch their movies. Everything is pretty much backed and aligned to the US dollar, directly or indirectly. And consequently, the United States and Europe were hit hardest with the totalitarian measures, the mandated vaccine policies that were supplanted. Places in Austria, you weren't even allowed to leave your house if you weren't vaccinated. In Australia, you were locked in your home for extended periods of time. And like I say, this is something that is everywhere in the world, but it clearly was intended to hit the market leaders more so than everyone else. And I promise you, the 2030 agenda, which has already been published by the European Union, "You will be happy and own nothing," is a direct quote verbatim from that legislation. Is taking track. It's going to be there for the taking. And if you align this to the occultist industrial projects in Saudi Arabia as well, and the tunnel project between North Africa and southern Spain, it's quite clear that the agenda is going to hit home by 2030 at the very least. So in order to implement that, as we've talked about before, they need to reset the financial system. They're going to pursue a 1929 Wall Street crash scenario, 2008 financial crash, whereby people's savings, pensions, it's all going to be wiped from the system, and you're going to be essentially reliant on the government. Welfare, stimulus checks, even food ration coupons like post-Second World War Europe will be imposed, and people will thereon be completely subservient to a state which could be correlated quite simply to that which was pursued during the Soviet times. And again, there is really no such thing as communism and capitalism. It's all one entity. Communism can't exist without capitalism. Capitalism created communism. It's one totalitarian system that's rebranded to make people think that they live different lives, when in effect it's all centrally governed by a banking system that has absolutely zero liability whatsoever. So remember that going into the next year.